Hello, today we're doing lesson 8.5, adding and subtracting rational expressions. Adding and subtracting a rational expression is the same as adding or subtracting a fraction. When you add or subtract a fraction, you make sure you have a common denominator, and then you add or subtract the numerator. In the end, of course, make sure you simplify if necessary. So let's just go ahead and get started. These are some simple problems because if we take a look, there's common denominators. So we don't need to do anything to change the fraction. We're just going to go ahead and add or subtract the numerator. So in the first one, 7 plus 3 is 10. We leave the denominator alone. See if you can simplify, which you can. You can take a 2 out of both. So my answer would be 5 over 2x. The next one, we're going to subtract the numerators. So 2 minus 1 is 1 over 3x squared. There's nothing we can divide out of the numerator and denominator, so we're done. Number 3, we add the numerators. They are not like terms, so we leave it like this. In the numerator, if you can simplify, simplify. We can factor out a 2, so I'm going to be left with x squared plus 1. If you take a look, the denominator is the same thing, so those actually divide out, and in this problem, I'm left with just 2. Okay, so go ahead, take a minute to pause the video and try this first. You try on your own. Okay, now we're going to add and subtract rational expressions with unlike denominators. So this is probably the most challenging part of this section, is that we have to find a common denominator. We're going to do so by finding the least common multiple. So we're going to practice these 3 problems. Now, here's the first thing you should do. If you can factor it, factor it. So this first one, I can't factor it. I leave that alone. But the second one, I can take a 5x out. Now, when I take a 5x out, I'm left with a 2x minus 3. Now, here's what I like to compare. What do these two have the same of? They both have a 5. So we know our least common multiple is going to be a 5. This one has an x, but this one has an x cubed. So this one is missing 2 more x's. It can only be as small as the biggest denominator. So we know it has to have an x cubed. So I would have to put 2 more x's in here. Then this one I'm done with, but this one still has a 2x minus 3. So I'm missing a 2x minus 3. This would be what we call the least common multiple. So you see what I'm doing? I'm comparing the two, and I'm making sure they both have what each other has. So let's try it again. It's a little bit easier when you factor it all. So if I take a look at number 2, I can take a 4 out. When I take a 4 out, I'm left with x squared minus 4. Now this gets factored further. I can do x plus 2 and x minus 2. So this is what I get when I completely factor 4x squared minus 16. Now this one, I'm going to go ahead and take a 6 out. When I do that, I'm left with x squared minus 4x plus 4, and then I can factor that trinomial. So I have 6 times x minus 2 times x minus 2. Okay, now if we take a look, they both have an x minus 2. So I'm going to go ahead and write that down. Now, this one has an x plus 2, this one doesn't. So we know we're missing an x plus 2. So we're going to go ahead and write that down. This one has a second x minus 2, and this one doesn't, so I know I'm missing that. Now, this one has a 4, and this one has a 6. So think back when you were younger and you were adding fractions. If I were to add 1/4 and 1/6, what would I make that denominator? So what's the least common multiple between 4 and 6? And it's 12. If I multiply 4 by 3, I get 12, and if I multiply 6 by 2, I get 12. So I need the number 12. This would be my least common multiple. Okay? All right, let's try this problem. Number 3. I'm going to factor out an 8. I'm left with x minus 2. I'm going to factor out a 12. I'm left with x squared plus x minus, 6. I can factor this further, so I have 12. And then I have x squared plus 3 and x plus 3, not x squared, and then x minus 2. Okay, so here's what I'm looking at. I'm looking at this term and this term. Okay, they both have an x minus 2. So I'm going to go ahead and write that down. Now, this one has an x plus 3. This one's missing it, so I know I need that. Cross that off. Now, I have an 8 and a 12 left. So I want to look for the least common multiple between those. What can I make if that was my denominator? If I was adding 1/8 and 1/12, what would I need to make that denominator? Well, you can make it a 24. If I take 8 times 3, I get 24, and if I take 12 times 2, I get 24. This would be my least common multiple. Okay, I really want you to try this next you try on your own because you need to be able to find least common multiples in order to add or subtract fractions. So go ahead, pause the video, and take a minute to do that. Okay, on to adding or subtracting when we do not have like denominators. Now these can be tricky, and the best way to do this is to practice. So when I'm looking, I have a 4x and a 7. Okay, so these are the two terms you're looking at. One has an x, one doesn't. So I know my least common denominator has to have an x. Okay, then I have a 4 and a 7. So I'm looking for the least common multiple between 4 and 7, and that would be 28. This needs to be my denominator, okay, 28x. So I need to say, what do I multiply 4x by to make it a 28x? That would just be 7 over 7, so I have 21. What do I multiply 7 by to make it a 28x? That will be 4x. So I'm going to have 21 minus 4x. Now, you want to check to see if there's anything we can divide out. I cannot, do not cross off a 2 here with this one because of the 21. You see if you get factor first, which you can't, so this is my final answer. Okay, and like I said, the more we practice, the better we'll get at it. Okay, so number 2. I leave that denominator alone. There's nothing I can do there. This one, I'm going to factor out a 3x. When I factor out a 3x, I'm left with x plus 1. Okay, now, they both have a 3, right? Because I can divide 3 into 9, but it needs to be a 9. I can't go smaller than my largest number. So I know my least common denominator has to have a 9. This one has an x squared and this one has an x. So I know it has to at least have an x squared. This one has an x plus 1, this one doesn't, so it's missing. This is my least common denominator. So what do I do to this fraction to make this denominator look like this? Well, you're missing an x plus 1. So I'm going to multiply my numerator by x plus 1. So I get 7x plus 7. This one, I'm missing a 3 and an x. So I have 3x squared. Now, what I normally do in this one is I rewrite it in descending order. So I have 3x squared plus 7x plus 7 over my big denominator, my least common denominator. Now, I want to see if I can factor the numerator. If I multiply 3 times 7, I get 21. Is there anything that multiplies to give me 21 and adds to give me 7? No. So you cannot simplify this. This is your final answer. Okay, ready to try the next one? Number 3. First thing you're going to do is factor the denominators. This is going to give me an x minus 4. This is going to give me an x plus 3. This one I'm going to factor 12 out, and I'm left with x minus 4. Okay, let's look at these two denominators. Right off to the side what you're missing. This one doesn't have a 12, so we know it needs a 12. They both have an x minus 4, so we know we need that. And then this one has an x plus 3, and this one doesn't, so we need that too. Okay, now, what is this denominator missing to look like this? Just a 12. So we're going to multiply the numerator by 12. What is this denominator missing to look like this? Just an x plus 3. So I'm going to go ahead and multiply my numerators. So I get 12, I hate when that happens, 12 times x is 12x. Here I get 5 times x plus 3 is 5x plus 15. And then sometimes I'll simplify it, so I get 17x plus 15, and then I'll go ahead and write my denominator. And again, you want to check to see if you can simplify this numerator at all, see if anything can be factored, which it can't. So I have to leave my answer like this. Now, it's really important that you pause the video and try the second one on your, or the you try on your own. You need to practice this to see if you understand how to find the least common denominator, and then how to multiply both fractions, and then how to simplify the numerator, and then your final answer. And then if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, go ahead, write it at the bottom of the paper, and I will see you tomorrow in class.